On the hottest morning of the year in Miami, a 7-year-old girl enters a crowded courtroom to witness her father's trial. With a simple touch and words brimming with faith, she challenges the most skeptical and relentless judge in the state of Florida, promising a miracle. Before hundreds of witnesses, the impossible begins to unfold, shaking the pillars of justice and logic. And in that courtroom, it wasn't just one man who rose from his wheelchair. It was an entire city that began to believe again. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We're continuing. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The Brighton Central Courthouse in Sussex was more crowded than usual that February morning. The suffocating heat of Sussex made the old fans spin uselessly, while sweat dripped from the tense brows of those present. Room 12, known as the courtroom of Judge Anthony Nogueira, the most feared and respected judge in the county, was about to begin the trial that would forever change not only the life of the Alden family, but of everyone in that chamber. Victoria, a girl of just 7, dressed in a simple white cotton dress and worn sandals, observed the environment with curious and determined eyes. Her curly hair was tied in 2 braids made by her mother, Constance, who squeezed her hand tightly, as if holding the last drop of hope. In the dock sat Joachim Alden, a respected fisherman from the neighborhood of Shoreham-by-Sea, unjustly accused of destroying environmental protection areas to build his small fish market. With a tired face, eyes marked by sleepless nights, he looked at his daughter and wife, sitting in the back rows, feeling a pang in his chest as he realized how much the proceedings had already consumed the family's savings and peace. "Please, all rise for the entrance of His Honor Judge Anthony Nogueira," announced the bailiff, in a solemn tone. The characteristic creak of a wheelchair echoed through the silence that settled. Judge Anthony Nogueira, a man in his early 50s, with impeccably combed grey hair and eyes as penetrating as eagles, entered, guided by his assistant. He was a man known for his coldness and the relentless skepticism with which he conducted trials. Many whispered that ever since the accident that left him paraplegic 15 years ago, his bitterness had turned into excessive strictness. "You may be seated," he ordered in a deep voice as he adjusted the papers in front of him. His long, pale fingers contrasted with the dark wood of the table. The defense barrister, Ms. Helen Rochester, a determined middle-aged woman who had taken the case pro bono, stood up, adjusting her simple, worn suit. "Your Honor, before we begin, I would like to emphasize that my client is an honest man, a family man with no prior criminal record. The evidence against him is circumstantial and—" "Barrister," the judge interrupted, "save your arguments for the appropriate moment. We are here to follow due process, not to hear premature emotional appeals." In the audience, Constance squeezed her daughter's hand even tighter. Victoria did not take her eyes off the judge. There was something in the child's gaze, a mixture of innocence and wisdom that seemed out of place in someone so young. The prosecutor, Mr. Maurice Davies, a man of polished appearance and calculated words, began the accusation. His sentences wove a web of assumptions that transformed the simple fisherman into a greedy environmental destroyer. With each word, Joachim lowered his head further, defeated, while Constance stifled a sob. It was during a break for the presentation of documents that something unexpected happened. Victoria, in a sudden movement that took everyone by surprise, slipped from her mother's hand and walked purposefully down the central aisle, until she stood before the judge's bench. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Anthony thundered, visibly annoyed by the interruption. "Bailiff, remove this child." "Please, Your Honor." Victoria's childish yet firm voice surprised everyone. "I can make you walk again." An astonished silence filled the room for a second, soon replaced by nervous laughter and mocking comments. The judge felt his face flush with irritation and embarrassment. "This is an affront to the court," he exclaimed, banging his gavel. "Bailiff, remove this girl from here now and identify those responsible." Constance stood up, terrified, trying to reach her daughter. "Forgive me, Your Honor. She's just a child. Please don't take it the wrong way." But Victoria remained impassive before the judge, her dark eyes, deep as water wells, fixed on his with disconcerting serenity. "I can make you walk," she repeated more firmly. "But first you have to release my father. He didn't do anything wrong." The laughter increased. Journalists covering the case exchanged amused glances while frantically taking notes. What a peculiar story they would have to tell. The girl who promised a miracle in the middle of the courtroom. "This is absurd," murmured the prosecutor, adjusting his expensive tie. "Your Honor, this is clearly an orchestrated attempt to disrupt the proceedings and unduly influence the court." Judge Anthony observed the girl. There was something in that childish gaze that deeply disturbed him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pleading. It was certainty. Such absolute certainty that for a fleeting moment, he almost believed it was possible. "Child," he said, controlling his voice to sound firm, but without his usual harshness, "do you know where you are? This is a court of law, not a circus. Impossible promises are not made here." "It's not impossible," Victoria replied with the simplicity of childhood. "You just have to believe. Like I believe in my father." Joachim watched the scene, stunned. His heart raced between pride for his daughter's courage and terror for the consequences of that act. "Your Honor," Barrister Helen intervened, seizing the unusual situation, "perhaps we could give the child 2 minutes. After all, what harm could it do?" The spectators exchanged surprised glances. The prosecutor opened his mouth to protest, but was interrupted by the judge. 2 minutes, he said with an ironic smile at the corner of his lips. 2 minutes for this spectacle, and then we will proceed with the serious trial as the law dictates." A murmur filled the room. Victoria looked at her father, who was watching her with tear-filled eyes, and then turned back to face the judge. Without hesitation, she approached the wheelchair. "May I?" she asked, indicating she wanted to touch his legs. The judge, maintaining a facade of superiority, assented with a mocking air. "Be my guest. Enjoy your 2 minutes." Silence settled as Victoria knelt before the wheelchair. She placed her small brown hands on the judge's inert legs and closed her eyes. Her lips began to move in a silent prayer, only occasionally letting out loose words: light, strength, healing. The laughter resumed, more subdued. The girl seemed so sincere in her concentration that there was something embarrassing about openly mocking her. Constance wept silently, torn between pride for her daughter and fear of what would happen next. Judge Anthony maintained his sarcastic smile, but his mind wandered back 15 years to that rainy night on the A259 road to Eastbourne, when his life changed forever. The accident that took his mobility also took his dreams and, in large part, his faith in anything beyond the tangible. 30 seconds, he announced, to break the silence and his own inner discomfort. Victoria was not shaken. She continued her prayer, now murmuring words that sounded like a small river flowing, continuous, serene, determined. That's when the judge felt it. A slight, almost imperceptible tingling in his right thigh. 15 years before that trial, Anthony Nogueira was known as the Lightning Prosecutor. His name sent shivers down the corridors of the Brighton courthouse. Ambitious and relentless, he had built a brilliant career bringing down defendants with the precision of a surgeon. At that time, his eyes still held the sparkle of youth, and his haughty posture demonstrated the confidence of one who had never known defeat. Married to Eliza, a university literature professor, and father to Lucas, a 5-year-old boy, Anthony had everything money could buy, and social prestige guaranteed. The house on the Brighton seafront, the imported car, the international trips, all were part of the success package he displayed with pride. On that stormy night, he was driving on the A259, returning from a legal conference in Eastbourne. He was talking on the phone with Eliza, informing her he would arrive in a few hours, despite the torrential rain lashing the Sussex coast. "You shouldn't be driving and talking on the phone in this weather. Anthony," Eliza's worried voice sounded distant due to the poor connection. "Relax, love. I've driven this road hundreds of times. I need to get there today because I have an important hearing early tomorrow." What happened next remained a blur in his memory. Bright lights from the opposite direction, a sharp curve, wet asphalt, a skid, and then darkness. He woke up 3 days later in St. Elizabeth's Hospital. The first thing he felt was an inexplicable emptiness, followed by the terrifying realization he felt nothing from the waist down. The doctor, Dr. Oswald Menzies, confirmed his worst suspicion with delicate but direct words. There was irreversible spinal cord damage. Unfortunately, you will not walk again. The weeks that followed were a descent into hell, adapting to the wheelchair, physiotherapy sessions, the pitying glances that followed him. Anthony, who had always been a man of action, now depended on others for basic tasks. His soul hardened, as did his heart. Eliza tried during the first few months to be the support he needed, but Anthony built walls around himself, rejecting compassion and love as if they were insults to his new condition. "I don't want your pity," he often repeated, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. A year after the accident, the marriage ended. Eliza took Lucas to live in London, where she had family. "You didn't just lose the use of your legs, Anthony. You lost the capacity to love," were her last words before walking out the door. Devastated but refusing to show weakness, Anthony channeled all his bitterness into his career. Unable to continue as a prosecutor at the pace he desired, he took the exam for the judiciary and passed with distinction. He became known as the Iron Judge, incorruptible, relentless, and above all skeptical of human goodness. Year after year, the wheelchair became not only a means of locomotion, but part of his identity. The central courthouse adapted to him. Ramps were built, restrooms modified, a special parking space reserved. But none of this eased the pain he carried, the resentment against a fate he considered unfair. Rare were the people who could see beyond his authoritarian figure. Among them, only Ms. Celia, the woman who had worked in his house for over a decade, witnessed moments of vulnerability. It was she who occasionally found him looking at old photographs from when he walked, when he smiled, when he believed. It was also she who listened without judgment to the muffled cries into his pillow during nights when the phantom pain in his legs became unbearable. "Judge Anthony," Miss Celia would say during their morning conversations, while serving coffee, "you will find peace yet. Peace is for the weak." "Celia," he would reply with his usual sarcasm, "I content myself with justice." But what justice was this that he practiced? Over the years, his interpretation of the law had become increasingly rigid, with no room for nuances or mercy. Defendants trembled upon learning their case would be judged by Judge Anthony Nogueira. Barristers prepared exhaustively, knowing that any loophole would be relentlessly exploited. In recent years, his only contact with his son was through sporadic, formal phone calls. Lucas, now 20, was studying medicine in London, and during rare visits to Brighton, their meetings were marked by awkward silences and superficial conversations. Joachim Alden's case would be just another in his routine. Another proceeding, another sentence, another day in the life of a man who had given up on expecting anything extraordinary from the world. Until Victoria's eyes met his. At that exact moment, as the small hand rested on his inert leg, Anthony felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Fear. Not common fear, but a profound terror at the possibility, however absurd it seemed, that something could truly change. The tingling, initially mistaken for another episode of phantom pain, persisted. It was different. It was as if thousands of tiny needles were awakening nerves dormant for over a decade. The sensation began in his right thigh, slowly spreading to his knee. His face, trained for years not to show emotion, remained impassive. But his heart, oh, his heart beat with the force of one who glimpses the impossible. "Time's up," he announced, trying to keep his voice steady. He needed to end that scene, that farce, before his own hope grew to an unsustainable level. "Remove the girl and let us continue with the proceedings." Victoria opened her eyes, looking at him with serenity. "You're already feeling it, aren't you?" The question, asked in a confidential tone, hit him like a blow. How could she know? It was impossible for anyone to notice the slight alteration in his expression or perceive what was happening beneath his well-pressed trousers. "Don't be ridiculous," he replied, more to himself than to her. "Bailiff, please escort the child back to her seat." The bailiff, a middle-aged man named Sebastian, approached with a mixture of embarrassment and compassion. He gently held the girl's arm, who did not resist, but kept her eyes fixed on the judge's. "You will walk today," she affirmed, with disconcerting certainty. "I promise." As she was led back to her mother, Victoria maintained a small smile on her lips. It was not a smile of triumph or arrogance, but of peace, as if she truly knew something no one else could comprehend. The court returned to its former formality. The prosecutor resumed his arguments. The defense barrister counter-argued. Witnesses were called. But for Anthony Nogueira, nothing was as before. The tingling persisted. now accompanied by a sensation of warmth that gradually spread through both legs. "Your Honor, are you all right?" Barrister Helen Rochester's voice brought him back to reality. Apparently she had asked a question he hadn't heard. "Pardon me, Barrister. Could you repeat that?" Those present exchanged surprised glances. Judge Nogueira never got distracted during sessions, and he would never apologize for anything. "I asked if we can present the counter-evidence now." "Yes, of course," he replied, adjusting himself in his chair. The movement caused his right leg to move slightly, producing a soft rubbing sound against the metal of the wheelchair. No one seemed to notice, except Victoria. The girl, now sitting next to her mother, watched him intently. When their eyes met again, she nodded slightly, as if confirming something only the two of them knew. Anthony averted his gaze, trying to concentrate on the documents in front of him. But how could he, when his whole body vibrated with a sensation forgotten for 15 years, when every nerve seemed to awaken from a long sleep, sending confused signals to his brain? "Your Honor looks pale," commented the prosecutor. "Would you like a break in the trial?" "No," he replied curtly. "Let's continue." But as the trial proceeded, Anthony's mind wandered between the present and the past. He remembered running on the beach with Lucas, dancing with Eliza on Friday nights, climbing stairs without even thinking about it, all those small daily miracles that became impossible on one rainy night. And now, 15 years later, something inexplicable was happening, something medicine said was impossible, something that challenged his entire skeptical and bitter view of the world. Suddenly, something even more extraordinary occurred. Without any conscious command, his right foot moved forward, lightly tapping the underside of the table. Joachim Olden was born and raised in Shoreham by Sea, a neighborhood that embraces the Sussex Sea, with its fishing nets and songs echoing ancient traditions. Son of fishermen, he inherited from his father not only knowledge of the tides and winds, but also a deep respect for the ocean that generously had fed his family for generations. At 18, when many of his friends left to seek jobs in the city centre or other counties, Joachim decided to honor his roots. He would wake before the sun, push his small boat into the sea, and return only when the stars were already appearing in the sky. His calloused hands told stories of hard work, and his open smile reflected the satisfaction of a simple but honest life. It was at a local fair that he met Constance, a recently graduated young teacher who had come to the community to teach at the municipal school. Unlike most local girls, Constance brought with her books, dreams of university, and a determination that impressed the young fisherman. Perhaps it was the way she spoke of literary classics with the same passion with which he described the sea. Perhaps it was the way her eyes sparkled when talking about her students. The fact is that after a 2-year courtship, they married in the small chapel by the sea. The young couple's life flowed with the naturalness of the waves Joachim knew so well. Constance continued teaching, now specializing in adult literacy, and Joachim maintained his routine as a fisherman. The arrival of Victoria, 7 years before the fateful trial, completed their happiness. The girl, from a very young age, showed an unusual sensitivity. She seemed to understand people and the world in a way that went beyond her age. "This girl has a gift," said Miss Irene, the midwife who brought her into the world and one of the most respected matriarchs of the community. "She sees with the eyes of the soul." At first, Joachim and Constance regarded the comment as just another of the typical superstitions of the elders. But as time went on, they could not ignore the small miracles that happened around their daughter. Injured birds she cared for that flew again against all expectations, plants that bloomed out of season when watered by her, and, most notably, the way sick people seemed to recover more quickly after her visits. "It's a coincidence," said Joachim, the practical man that he was, although inwardly he began to wonder if there was something more. The Olden family's life changed drastically 3 years ago, when the county government announced a revitalization project for the Shoreham by Sea seafront. The plan, presented as an initiative to improve tourism and the working conditions of local fishermen, had a hidden agenda: the removal of small family fish markets to make way for sophisticated restaurants and standardized craft shops. The community was divided. Some, seduced by promises of jobs and financial compensation, agreed to leave their properties. Others, like Joachim, rose up against what they considered an affront to local culture, and the way of life that had sustained families for generations. "Our history is not for sale," he declared at a community meeting, gaining the support of several fishermen and long-time residents. Joachim's resistance gained strength when he, aided by Constance and some university professors, began to organize the community. Together, they created the Shoreham by Sea Traditional Fishermen's Association, sought legal support, and began documenting the sustainable practices they had maintained for decades, proving that their activities did not harm the environment. It was in this context that Joachim met Robert Miller, an influential businessman and the main investor behind the revitalization project. During a public hearing, Joachim presented a homemade documentary showing how artisanal fishing techniques preserved the marine balance while questioning the real environmental impact of the large developments planned. The video, amateurishly recorded but powerful in its simplicity, went viral on social media, generating a wave of support for the fishermen's cause. Robert Miller, negatively exposed by the media, publicly swore that Joachim would regret confronting him. The threats began subtly: anonymous calls, unknown cars parked in front of the family's small house, hostile glances from strangers who appeared in the community. Constance insisted they seek legal protection, but Joachim, confident in the justice of his cause, minimized the risks. "We're not doing anything wrong. The truth is on our side," he repeated, with the same certainty with which he predicted weather changes by the behavior of seagulls. The situation escalated when a local newspaper reported alleged irregularities in Joachim's fish market, accusing him of building in an environmental protection area and using prohibited fishing techniques. The accusations, completely fabricated, were accompanied by evidence, manipulated photographs and testimonies from people who had never set foot in Shoreham by Sea. "This is Miller's doing," Constance affirmed, reading the article with indignation. "He's using money to buy the press." Joachim, always firm, sought legal help. That's when he met barrister Helen Rochester, an experienced lawyer who, after hearing his story and visiting the community, decided to take the case pro bono. "Your cause is just, Mr. Alden," she explained during her first visit to the fish market. "But we are facing powerful people. We will need a lot of strength and determination." What none of them imagined was that Robert Miller had much deeper connections than he appeared. A personal friend of the chief of police and several influential politicians, he managed to have an operation mounted against Joachim and other fishermen who resisted the project. One Sunday morning, as the family prepared to go to church, police officers raided the Alden home. Without a clear warrant, they searched every room, destroying furniture and frightening Victoria, who witnessed her father being handcuffed and dragged out like a criminal. "Daddy didn't do anything wrong," the girl cried, trying to reach him while Constance held her, torn between despair and the need to protect her daughter. Joachim was formally accused of environmental crimes, public land invasion, and resisting inspection. The evidence, clearly forged, included prohibited fishing gear that had never been in his possession, and falsified documents about the ownership of the land where his family had lived for 3 generations. The months that followed were a calvary for the Alden family. With Joachim preventively detained, Constance alone took on the responsibilities of the house and the fish market, besides tirelessly fighting for her husband's release. The family's already scarce savings were quickly consumed by legal expenses. Victoria, forced to mature prematurely, became silent and observant. Her mother's tearful nights, rare visits to her father in prison, the pitying or suspicious glances from neighbors, all this shaped an extraordinary determination in the girl. It was during one of these visits to the detention center that Victoria, observing her father's debilitated state, made a decision. While Constance talked to Joachim about legal strategies and community news, the girl closed her eyes and offered a silent, intense prayer, unlike any conventional child's prayer. Opening her eyes, she stated with conviction, "Daddy, you're going to get out of here." "I promise." Joachim smiled, moved by his daughter's strength. "I know, my little one. The truth always comes out." "It's not just that," Victoria replied with a seriousness that did not match her 7 years. "I'm going to do something special." On the way home, Constance noticed her daughter was unusually pensive. "What's wrong, my dear? Are you worried about Daddy?" "No, Mummy," Victoria replied, looking out the bus window. I'm thinking about the judge. Which judge, honey? The judge who will free Daddy, the one in the wheelchair. Constance frowned, confused. As far as she knew, Joachim's case did not yet have a designated judge, and certainly no one had mentioned anyone in a wheelchair. How do you know that, Victoria? The girl shrugged as if the answer was obvious. I saw it in a dream. He hasn't been able to walk for a long time. He's sad inside, but he'll help Daddy when I help him. In the days that followed, Victoria began collecting newspaper clippings about judges in Brighton. Constance, initially concerned about her daughter's sudden obsession, decided to let her pursue that harmless interest, believing it was just a way for the child to cope with her father's absence. Until, leafing through one of the newspapers Victoria kept, Constance saw a photo of Judge Anthony Nogueira in an article about a controversial sentence. The text briefly mentioned that the strict judge, paraplegic for 15 years, maintained his reputation for inflexibility. "It's him, Mummy," Victoria exclaimed, pointing to the photo. "The judge who will help Daddy." Constance felt a shiver run down her spine. How could her daughter know? 2 weeks later, when the case finally came to trial, Judge Anthony Nogueira's appointment as the presiding judge confirmed Victoria's inexplicable prediction. As they prepared for the decisive hearing, Constance watched her daughter with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "What are you going to do, honey?" she asked while braiding Victoria's hair. The girl smiled, with the serenity of one who knows secrets beyond adult comprehension. "I'm going to keep my promise. Mummy, I'm going to make the judge walk again, and he's going to free Daddy." The sound that echoed through the courtroom was almost imperceptible, just a slight tap of the judge's shoe against the base of the table. To any casual observer, it could have been just a vibration of the wheelchair, an involuntary adjustment, perhaps even an acoustic illusion. But for Judge Anthony Nogueira, that minimal movement represented an earthquake in his reality. 15 years. 15 long years without being able to voluntarily move any part below the waist. And now, after the touch of a 7-year-old child's hands, his foot had moved. "Continue," he ordered, trying to maintain his composure while a whirlwind of emotions and sensations engulfed him. The prosecutor continued his argument, but the words sounded distant, almost incomprehensible to the judge. In the audience, Victoria smiled discreetly. Her serene gaze contrasted with the palpable tension of the courtroom. Constance, noticing something different in the judge's posture, leaned in to whisper in her daughter's ear. "What's happening, Victoria?" "It started, Mummy," the girl replied without taking her eyes off the magistrate. "He's already feeling it." At the defense table, Joachim observed the interaction between his daughter and wife with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Since his unjust arrest, he had clung to faith as a last refuge. Nights in the overcrowded cell were filled with silent prayers, not for himself, but for the family he had left helpless. "Your Honor," Barrister Helen Rochester's voice cut through his thoughts, "I would like to call our first defense witness, Mr. Gerald Stevens, president of the Shoreham-by-Sea Traditional Fishermen's Association." As an elderly man, his skin tanned by the sun and hands calloused, slowly walked to the center of the room. Judge Anthony tried to process what was happening to his body. The tingling had intensified, now spreading through both legs. It was as if electric currents were running through every nerve, every muscle dormant for a decade and a half. "Mr. Stevens," the barrister began, "how long have you known Joachim Alden?" "Since he was a lad this tall," replied the old fisherman, indicating with his hand the height of a child. "I watched this boy grow up, become a man, always respecting the sea and our traditions." The testimony continued, with Mr. Stevens detailing how Joachim had always been a proponent of sustainable fishing, respecting closed seasons and protected areas. He also explained how the Alden family's small fish market had been built on land that had belonged to the community for generations, long before any current environmental legislation. "And what about the accusations that he was using predatory fishing techniques?" asked Ms. Rochester. "That's a blatant lie," exclaimed the old man with genuine indignation. "Joachim is the one who most teaches the young ones how to preserve the sea. It was he who organized cleanup drives for the beach, who advocated for the creation of a marine reserve controlled by the fishermen themselves." Mr. Maurice Davies, the prosecutor, stood up with his usual calculated elegance. Mr. Stevens, do you have any documentary proof that the land where the fish market is located legally belongs to the defendant? Any deed, any official document? The old fisherman hesitated. Paper? No, sir. But everyone in Shoreham by Sea knows that piece of land has belonged to the Alden family for over 60 years. Joachim's father fished from there, his grandfather too. Does that count for nothing? For the law, unfortunately not, replied the prosecutor with a discreet smile of triumph. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Judge Anthony, who until then had maintained a neutral expression, felt a sharp pain shoot through his spine. Instinctively, he moved his legs in response. A small movement, but visible to anyone paying attention. A young reporter sitting in the front row reserved for the press widened her eyes. She was absolutely sure she had seen the judge's legs move. She discreetly nudged her colleague next to her, who shook his head in denial, certain she was imagining things. Prosecutor, the judge's voice sounded strangely tense. Your questions must be limited to the witness's testimony, without personal comments on the validity or otherwise of local traditions. The warning, unusual coming from a judge generally aligned with the prosecution, surprised everyone. Mr. Maurice cleared his throat, disconcerted. My apologies, Your Honor. I will rephrase my statement. As the interrogation continued, Anthony found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. The heat in his legs intensified with each minute, now accompanied by involuntary spasms that he desperately tried to disguise. 15 years of paralysis, and now, what was happening? Could it be that the words of that child? No, he thought, mentally reprimanding himself. This is absurd. It must be some temporary neurological phenomenon, some delayed reaction to medication. But deep down, an insistent voice whispered that something extraordinary was happening. Something that defied all rational explanation, all his skeptical view of the world. After Mr. Stevens' testimony, other witnesses were called, Joachim's neighbors who confirmed his dedication to the community and the environment, a marine biologist who attested to the sustainability of the fishing practices adopted by the association, even the local priest who spoke about the social projects Joachim had helped implement. With each new testimony favorable to the defendant, Judge Anthony felt increasingly uncomfortable, not just physically, with the growing sensations in his legs, but emotionally. As a magistrate, he had dealt with hundreds of cases, heard countless stories. But something about Joachim Alden's case sounded different. There was an authenticity in the testimonies that contrasted sharply with the formal accusations. Your Honor, called Barrister Helen, I would like to show a video that clearly demonstrates the manipulation of the evidence presented against my client. The prosecutor immediately stood up. Your Honor, objection. This material was not previously included in the proceedings and constitutes a surprise for the prosecution. Barrister Helen, the judge intervened, you know that I cannot allow new evidence at this stage of the proceedings without the prosecution having had prior access. Your Honor, the barrister insisted, this video was obtained last night. It clearly shows the moment when illegal fishing gear was planted on my client's property by people linked to the businessman Robert Miller, the main party interested in Joachim's conviction. A murmur filled the room. The prosecutor, visibly irritated, argued about the inadmissibility of the request, while Barrister Helen remained firm. Joachim in the dock looked on with renewed hope. That video could be his salvation. Silence, ordered the judge, banging his gavel. I will do the following. I will watch the video in my chambers in the presence of both parties. If I deem the material relevant and authentic, I will allow its inclusion in the proceedings. The decision surprised everyone. Judge Anthony Nogueira rarely showed such procedural flexibility, especially in favor of the defense. Some speculated that he was merely strictly following due process. Others, more attentive, noticed something different in his demeanor, a nuance of humanity. We will take a 30-minute break, he announced. After this interval, we will continue with the proceedings. As the bailiff helped guide his wheelchair out of the hall, the judge felt a pair of eyes following him intently. Victoria, still sitting next to her mother, watched him with a gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. When their eyes met, the girl smiled, not a common childish smile, but a gesture laden with ancient wisdom, as if sharing a secret only the two of them knew. In the corridor, away from the public gaze, Anthony asked to be alone for a few minutes. "I need a moment, Sebastian." "You can leave me here." The bailiff, accustomed to the judge's independence, nodded respectfully and stepped away. Finally alone, Anthony looked at his legs, those limbs that for so long had been merely useless appendages, a constant reminder of all he had lost. Hesitantly, he tried to move his right foot consciously. To his absolute astonishment, the foot responded, a small, trembling, imperfect movement, but unequivocally voluntary. Involuntary tears welled up in his eyes, momentarily blurring his vision. "This is impossible," he murmured to himself. "Nothing is impossible when you truly believe." The childish voice startled him. Turning quickly, he saw Victoria standing a few feet away, alone in the corridor. "What are you doing here, child? Where is your mother?" "She went to the restroom," Victoria replied, approaching fearlessly. "You can already move your legs, can't you?" Anthony felt a shiver run down his spine. How could she know? That's none of your business. Go back to the courtroom. "You don't need to be afraid," she continued, ignoring his order. "It's normal to feel afraid when something you thought impossible starts to happen. Look, I don't know what kind of game this is, but it's not a game," Victoria interrupted with surprising seriousness. "You're going to walk again today, and you'll understand that my father is innocent." Anthony Nogueira, the feared Iron Judge, suddenly felt vulnerable before that child. In his 15 years as a magistrate, he had faced brilliant barristers, dangerous criminals, high-pressure situations, but nothing had prepared him for that girl with deep eyes and disconcerting words. How did you do this?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Victoria smiled again, approaching a little closer. "I didn't do anything. It was you yourself." "What does that mean?" "It means you had forgotten how to believe. I just helped you remember." She gently placed her hand on the judge's knee. "Try again. Try to move your leg." As if hypnotized, Anthony focused on the mental command seen movies directed at his left leg. To his absolute astonishment, the knee flexed slightly, lifting the leg a few inches. "My God," he whispered, his voice choked. "See?" Victoria smiled. "Now you need to do the right thing for my father. He's a good man. He never hurt anyone." Before the judge could respond, approaching footsteps were heard. It was Constance looking for her daughter. "Victoria, I told you to wait for me," she exclaimed, worried. Seeing the judge, she made a small, respectful curtsy. "Forgive me, Your Honor. I hope she hasn't bothered you." "No, she hasn't bothered me," Anthony replied, still stunned. "Take her back to the room." As mother and daughter walked away, the judge remained still, trying to process what had just happened. 15 years of medical science, 15 years of absolute certainty about his condition, being challenged by a child who had appeared out of nowhere in his courtroom. The bailiff returned, ready to escort him back. "Is everything all right, Judge Anthony?" For a moment, the judge considered telling him what was happening. But how to explain the inexplicable? How to put into words something that defied all logic and reason? "Yes, Sebastian, I'm ready to return." As he was led back to the courtroom, an inconceivable idea began to take shape in his mind. What if the girl was right about everything? What if Joachim Alden was truly innocent, a victim of a conspiracy? And what if the real miracle was not just the recovery of his movements, but the opportunity to truly deliver justice? When Judge Anthony Nogueira returned to the courtroom, something had changed. It wasn't just the physical sensation in his legs. It was something deeper, a subtle transformation in his gaze, in his posture, in his very essence. Those present couldn't pinpoint exactly what was different, but they felt that something extraordinary was happening. "Let's resume proceedings," he announced, with a voice that seemed simultaneously firm and renewed. "Mr. Davies and Miss Rochester, please accompany me to my chambers to examine the video mentioned." As the bailiff guided his chair out of the hall, followed by the two barristers, a murmur spread among those present. Reporters whispered to each other. Spectators exchanged theories about the possible content of the recording, and Joachim looked at his daughter and wife with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "What did you do, my daughter?" Constance whispered, hugging Victoria tightly. "I just talked to him, Mummy," the girl replied with simplicity. "He's starting to believe." In the chambers, the atmosphere was palpably tense. The prosecutor, visibly irritated by the breach of protocol, kept his arms crossed in a defensive posture. Ms. Helen, in turn, tried to contain her anxiety, aware that this could be her client's last chance. "Before we watch this supposed evidence," Mr. Maurice began, "I would like to formally register my protest regarding the admissibility of this material. This is clearly a maneuver by the defense to—" "Your protest is registered, Mr. Davies," the judge interrupted with unusual serenity. "Now, if you don't mind, let's get to the facts." The barrister handed a USB drive to the judge's assistant, who connected the device to the computer. The screen showed images from a security camera with the date and time from the previous day. The video, though of low quality, clearly showed two men stealthily entering Joachim's property in the early morning, carrying a box. With quick and precise movements, they hid prohibited fishing nets and other illegal equipment at various strategic points. "I recognize this man," the judge pointed, indicating one of the intruders. "He is Robert Miller's personal security guard. He has been in my chambers before when Miller came to deal with other cases." The prosecutor paled. As a man of law, he had always believed he was on the right side. Although he knew the system wasn't perfect, he had never imagined being used as an instrument in such a blatant conspiracy. "Your Honor," he began hesitantly, "I was completely unaware of these facts. If this is authentic, I will be the first to request the withdrawal of the charges." Ms. Helen could barely contain her emotion. After months of fighting a system that seemed determined to condemn her client, she finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel. "We need to verify the authenticity of this video," the judge decided. "I will call an independent expert to analyze the material immediately. In the meantime, we will suspend the hearing until tomorrow." What none of those present noticed, focused as they were on the computer screen, was the small movement Judge Anthony made with his right foot, testing his new and still unbelievable ability to move. Upon returning to the main hall, the judge announced the temporary suspension of the trial, citing the need for technical analysis of new evidence. The news generated mixed reactions: frustration among journalists who had expected a resolution that day, relief on Joachim's tired face, and a small smile on Victoria's face. As the room emptied, Anthony remained seated in his chair, discreetly observing the movement of his toes beneath his suit trousers. He was determined to understand what was happening to his body and to his soul. "Sebastian," he called the bailiff, "ask no one to disturb me for the next 2 hours. I need to review some details of the case in privacy." As soon as he found himself completely alone, the judge took a deep breath, preparing for what he was about to attempt. With his hands resting on the armrests of the wheelchair, he concentrated all his strength and will on a single command: "Stand up." For an instant, nothing happened. Then gradually he felt his muscles respond, weak, uncoordinated, but undoubtedly alive. His legs trembled violently, unaccustomed to the effort after 15 years of inactivity. With fierce determination, he pushed his body upwards. For a very brief moment, he stood, wobbling, unstable but standing, before his legs gave way and he fell back into the chair, breathing heavily from the effort. Tears streamed freely down his usually impassive face. 15 years. 15 long years trapped in that chair, believing he would never again feel the simple pleasure of standing. And now, thanks to a girl who had appeared out of nowhere. How is this possible? He murmured to himself, wiping away the tears. All his rational training, all his skepticism built over years, everything he believed about the world and its possibilities was being challenged by something he could not explain. In his apartment, hours later, Anthony dismissed Ms. Celia earlier than usual. "Are you all right, Judge Anthony?" she asked, concerned by his disturbed appearance. "You look pale." "I'm fine, Celia, I just need some rest." Alone, he locked all the doors and windows, making sure he wouldn't be surprised. He positioned the wheelchair near the wall to have support if needed. Then slowly he tried again. The process was painful and exhausting. His muscles, atrophied from disuse, protested with every movement. The first attempts resulted in falls that would certainly leave bruises. But with each failure, instead of giving up as he would have in the past, he felt an even greater determination. On the 20th attempt, he managed to stand for almost a full minute, leaning against the wall. On the 30th, He took a hesitant step. He fell, got up again, tried once more. At 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat and exhausted, but with his heart overflowing with an emotion he had forgotten the name of, hope, he managed to walk from the bedroom to the living room without falling. The journey, which any person would make in seconds, took him almost 20 minutes. But for a man who believed he would never walk again, it was a journey more extraordinary than any expedition to the ends of the earth. On an impulse he himself didn't understand, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Hello?" The female voice, though sleepy, was unmistakable even after so long. "Eliza, it's me, Anthony." A heavy silence followed until his ex-wife replied cautiously, "Anthony, has something happened? It's almost 4 in the morning. I walked today, Eliza." More silence, now laden with confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'm standing now, walking in my living room." "Anthony, have you been drinking?" "This isn't funny." "No, Eliza, it's true. I don't know how to explain it. It's something that defies everything I believed possible. It started in court with a little girl, the daughter of a defendant. She said she would make me walk again, and Anthony," Eliza's voice sounded worried now, "are you okay? Do you want me to call someone?" He realized for the first time how absurd he sounded. How could he blame her for not believing? He himself could barely believe it, even while living that extraordinary experience. "Sorry for calling at this hour. It was an impulse." "I'm fine, don't worry. Give my regards to Lucas." He hung up before she could respond, suddenly feeling foolish and vulnerable. What was he thinking? That she would celebrate? That she would believe him? That she would come back? 15 years was too long to foster any hope in that regard. Nevertheless, the call, however awkward it had been, brought an important realization. If he truly wanted to start over, he would need to do more than simply walk again. He would need to relearn how to be human again. The next morning, as the bailiff prepared to pick him up from home, as he did every day, Judge Anthony surprised everyone. "Sebastian," he said on the phone, "today I will go on my own. I have a personal matter to resolve first." The bailiff, disconcerted by the break in routine, tried to argue. "But, Your Honor, you always—" "Things have changed, Sebastian. Many things have changed." With considerable effort but unwavering determination, Anthony dressed himself, something he hadn't done completely in years. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but each small victory against physical limitations increased his confidence. He called a taxi and gave a destination that would surprise anyone who knew him: Shoreham by Sea Beach. Arriving there, with the help of the driver, he positioned his wheelchair on the firm sand near the water. The Sussex Sea stretched before him, majestic in its deep blue, cradled by the gentle rhythm of the waves. Fishermen prepared their boats for daily work, indifferent to the presence of the solitary man in his chair. It was then that he spotted a familiar face, Mr. Gerald Stevens, the witness from the previous day, organizing fishing nets with other men. After a moment of hesitation, the judge called him. The old fisherman approached cautiously, clearly surprised to find the magistrate there. "Mr. Stevens," Anthony began, "I would like to ask you a few questions, not as a judge, but as someone who wants to understand the truth." The fisherman's initial distrust gave way to a passionate account of life in Shoreham by Sea, the community's struggle against large economic interests, and the fundamental role Joachim played in that resistance. "That young man has a heart as big as the sea. Judge, he never harmed a fly, let alone destroy the nature he loves. It's all an invention of this Miller fellow, who wants to drive us out to build his resorts." After almost 2 hours of conversation, Anthony had a much deeper understanding of the case, and of himself. For the first time in years, he had truly listened to someone, without the filter of prejudice or institutional constraints. "Thank you. Mr. Stevens, you've helped me more than you know." As the old man walked away, Anthony gazed at the horizon, feeling the sea breeze on his face. It was time to make a decision. With renewed determination, he picked up the phone and called his chambers. "Regina, it's me. I need you to summon the parties in the Alden case to resume the trial today at 2 p.m. "Yes, today. And one more thing. Contact the National Crime Agency. I want a search and seizure warrant for Robert Miller's offices and residence, immediately." Hanging up, Anthony Noguera did something he hadn't done in so long that it felt like a first time. He genuinely smiled. It wasn't just his body waking from a long sleep. It was his consciousness, his humanity. With effort, leaning on the chair, he stood up again. His steps on the sand were uncertain, but increasingly firm. A fisherman in the distance saw the scene and stopped open-mouthed, believing he was witnessing something supernatural. For Anthony, however, the true miracle was not walking, it was feeling alive again. Today, he promised himself, I will deliver true justice, and I will thank that girl for the greatest gift anyone could give me. As he slowly walked back to the wheelchair, which now seemed more a symbol than a necessity, he felt a deep conviction that his life would never be the same. Victoria, with her innocent and powerful faith, had not only returned movement to his legs, she had returned purpose to his existence. The Brighton Central Courthouse buzzed with activity when Judge Anthony Nogueira arrived for the resumption of the trial. News of the urgent summons spread quickly, attracting even more journalists and curious onlookers. Various theories circulated through the corridors, from Joachim's possible immediate conviction to his complete acquittal, depending on who was speculating. What no one could imagine was what would actually happen that afternoon. Sebastian, the bailiff, waited at the entrance, visibly concerned by the break in the routine established for so many years. "Your Honor, I was worried. You've never changed your routine in all these years." Anthony smiled in a way that further disconcerted the official. "Sometimes, Sebastian, we need to break routines to see what's right in front of us." The bailiff noticed something different in the magistrate's gaze, a vivacity, a presence he hadn't seen in a long time. As he guided the wheelchair through the courthouse corridors, he had the impression that the judge barely touched the wheels, as if he was about to stand up at any moment. In the courtroom, the buzz ceased when the judge entered. All eyes turned to him, including Victoria's, who smiled discreetly as she noticed the evident transformation in the man's demeanor. "Good morning, everyone," he began, with a voice that sounded different, more human, less mechanical. "Before we formally resume the trial, I would like to communicate some preliminary decisions." The prosecutor and the defense barrister exchanged glances, surprised by the informal and direct tone. The video presented by the defense was analyzed by 3 independent experts overnight. All confirmed its authenticity and the absence of any manipulation. Furthermore, based on this evidence, I have issued search and seizure warrants for the properties of Mr. Robert Miller, which are being executed at this moment by the National Crime Agency. A murmur of astonishment swept through the room. Prosecutor Maurice Davies stood up, visibly affected by the news. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the prosecution formally requests the withdrawal of all charges against Joachim Alden. It is clear that we were misled by fabricated evidence." Miss Helen could barely contain tears of relief. Joachim in the dock lowered his head, too emotional to maintain composure. "Request accepted," declared the judge. "But before we close this case, I have something important to say." The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Everyone sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. "For 15 years, Anthony began, I served justice in this country according to my understanding of the law. I believed that rigidity and impartiality were the only ways to honor my office. But yesterday, something happened in this room that changed not only my view on this specific case, but on the very nature of justice." He paused, his eyes finding Victoria's among the crowd. The girl smiled serenely, as if she already knew exactly what would come next. "A child taught me that true justice cannot exist without compassion, without the ability to believe in the impossible when all evidence points against it." Those present exchanged confused glances, uncertain about what the judge was trying to communicate. Some suspected he was having some kind of emotional breakdown after years of isolation and bitterness. "This same child," he continued, "made a promise that everyone, including myself, considered absurd. She said she would make the impossible happen." Anthony rested his hands on the armrests of the wheelchair, inhaling deeply. His heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of fear and excitement taking over every cell of his body. And the impossible happened. With these words, to the complete astonishment of everyone present, Judge Anthony Nogueira pushed himself against the armrests of the chair and slowly stood up. The first to notice was a young reporter in the front row, who dropped his notepad to the floor with a dull thud. Then, like a wave, the shock spread throughout the room. Nervous whispers turned into exclamations of amazement. Camera flashes fired, capturing the historic moment. The judge was standing, trembling, uncertain, leaning slightly on the table in front of him, but unequivocally standing after 15 years of complete paralysis. "My God," someone exclaimed in the audience. "It's a miracle." Sebastian, the faithful bailiff who for so many years had assisted the magistrate, fell to his knees, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face. "How? How is this possible?" stammered Mr. Maurice, completely stunned by the scene. Anthony, with visible but determined effort, took a step to the side. Then another. His movements were unsteady, like those of a child learning to walk, but they were real. The man who for a decade and a half had been confined to a wheelchair was walking, before hundreds of shocked witnesses. "Yesterday," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "a 7-year-old girl placed her hands on my legs and promised that I would walk again." Everyone laughed. I myself didn't believe it. As he spoke, he continued walking slowly, circling the table. Each step seemed firmer than the last, as if his body was quickly recalling functions dormant for years. But something happened. Something science cannot explain. Something that challenges everything I believed possible in this world. His eyes sought Victoria again. The girl maintained the same serene smile, as if watching the natural conclusion of something she had always known would happen. "Victoria," the judge called, extending his hand towards her, "would you come here?" Absolute silence filled the courtroom as the little girl stood up and walked calmly down the central aisle, under the astonished gaze of everyone. Constance, torn between pride and fear, watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. When she reached the judge, Victoria looked up, meeting the eyes of the man who now observed her from a height that would previously have been impossible. "How did you do this?" Anthony asked in a low voice, almost a plea. "I didn't do it, Your Honor," she replied with the crystalline simplicity of childhood. "It was you who believed." The answer, unexpected in its depth, brought new tears to Anthony's eyes. He knelt with some difficulty to be at the same level as the girl, a symbolic gesture that went unnoticed by no one. "Thank you," he whispered, more sincere than he had ever been in his entire adult life. "You didn't just give me back my legs. You gave me back my soul." Victoria smiled more broadly, her eyes shining with a wisdom that transcended her age. "Now can you free my father?" she asked with the pragmatic innocence typical of children. An involuntary sob escaped the judge's throat, mixing laughter and tears in an expression of pure emotional catharsis. "Yes, Victoria, your father is free." Standing up again now with more firmness, Anthony turned to the silent courtroom. People remained motionless, as if they feared that any movement could undo the miracle they were witnessing. "Joachim Alden," he formally announced, "all charges against you have been withdrawn. You are free to return to your family and community." The police officers guarding the defendant were momentarily paralyzed, uncertain how to proceed in the face of that extraordinary situation. "What are you waiting for?" the judge inquired with an unprecedented softness in his voice. "Remove this innocent man's handcuffs." As Joachim was freed, Constance ran to him, hugging him with all the strength of someone who fears they are dreaming. Victoria joined her parents, completing that embrace that symbolized the restoration not only of a family, but of justice itself in its deepest sense. The room erupted in applause. Journalists frantically tried to record every detail of that historic moment, aware that they were witnessing something that defied all conventional explanations. Furthermore, the judge continued, raising his voice to be heard over the commotion, "I order the immediate opening of an I-2 investigation into the actions of Robert Miller and his associates in attempting to falsely incriminate Joachim Alden and other members of the Shoreham by Sea community." The announcement was met with a new wave of applause. Ms. Helen, an experienced professional who rarely allowed herself to be shaken, wept openly, embracing her assistants. "And finally," Anthony concluded, "I would like to make a personal request to all of you." The noise gradually subsided, everyone eager to hear what would come next. What we witnessed today transcends our rational understanding. Some will call it a miracle. Others will seek scientific explanations yet unknown. It doesn't matter what name we give it. What matters is that we learn the most valuable lesson. We must never lose the ability to believe in the impossible. As the judge spoke, his body seemed to gain strength with each passing moment. His posture, once hesitant, now conveyed a calm confidence. It was as if every cell was awakening, every muscle relearning its function, every nerve celebrating the return to full life. This child, he said, indicating Victoria, with her unwavering faith, not only transformed my life, but also reminded us all of the true meaning of justice. It is not just about coldly following the letter of the law, but about seeking the truth with compassion and courage. Reporters wrote furiously, aware that those words would make history. Video cameras captured every gesture, every expression of that transformed man who, until a few hours before, was known as the coldest and most ruthless of judges. Therefore, I ask everyone who witnessed this extraordinary moment, take this lesson into your lives. Never let skepticism kill your ability to believe. Never allow bitterness to suffocate your compassion. And above all, never lose faith that even when everything seems impossible, miracles can happen. A reverent silence followed his words. Then slowly people began to stand, applauding with an intensity that made the walls of the old courthouse tremble. It was not just a perfunctory applause, but the genuine expression of souls deeply touched by something that transcended the everyday. Anthony Nogueira, the man who for 15 years had closed himself off from the world in his bitterness and disbelief, was now not only physically standing, but spiritually elevated to a new understanding of life and his purpose in it. And it all began with an impossible promise, made by a child who refused to accept limits, both those imposed on a judge's legs and those imposed on her father's freedom. 6 months passed since the extraordinary event at the Brighton Central Courthouse. The case, which became known as the Courthouse Miracle, made headlines in newspapers and magazines across the country, sparking heated debates among doctors, scientists, religious leaders, and skeptics of all stripes. Teams of neurologists from the most renowned medical centres in the UK and abroad exhaustively examined Judge Anthony Nogueira. Old MRI scans were compared with new ones. Detailed analyses were conducted. Hypotheses were raised and discarded. The official conclusion, published in respected scientific journals, left more questions than answers. Recovery inexplicable by current medical parameters. Some scientists proposed theories about spontaneous neural regeneration. Others spoke of brain plasticity at levels never before documented, while the more cautious limited themselves to classifying the case as anomalous and deserving of more in-depth longitudinal studies. For the people of Shoreham by Sea, however, there was no mystery at all. The event only confirmed what many already suspected about little Victoria. She possessed a special gift, a connection with forces that transcended common understanding. On a sunny August afternoon, Shoreham by Sea beach was especially festive. Tables had been set up on the sand, decorated with flowers and colourful ribbons. Children ran back and forth, their laughter mixing with the sound of the waves. The aroma of seafood stew, spicy bean paste, and other traditional Sussex dishes filled the air, making the mouths of arriving guests water. It was the official celebration of the inauguration of the Shoreham by Sea Traditional Fishermen's Cooperative, a direct result of Joachim's acquittal and the subsequent revision of the Seafront Revitalisation Project. Under the new proposal, developed with the active participation of the community, family fish markets were preserved and modernised, transforming into authentic tourist spots that valued local culture instead of replacing it. Entrepreneurship and sustainable management courses were offered to fishermen, allowing them to expand their businesses without losing their traditional essence. Robert Miller, meanwhile, faced multiple lawsuits for falsification of evidence, attempted procedural fraud and racketeering. His assets had been frozen by the courts, and the business empire he had built through questionable methods began to crumble. Among the guests for the celebration, one figure stood out, former Judge Anthony Nogueira, now retired from the judiciary by his own decision. Walking with the aid of a cane, not out of necessity, but as a precaution recommended by doctors, he observed the movement with a serene smile that would have been unthinkable in his old self. "Judge Anthony," exclaimed Mr. Gerald Stevens, approaching with a glass of cashew juice in his hand. "So glad you came. I thought your commitments in the big city wouldn't allow it. I wouldn't miss this party for anything, Mr. Stevens, Anthony replied, shaking the old fisherman's calloused hand. After all, I owe a lot to this community. You owe nothing. Justice triumphed in the end. Anthony smiled, reflecting on how much his understanding of the word justice had changed in recent months. True justice goes beyond courtrooms, my friend. It happens when we recognize the dignity in every human being. As they talked, Anthony spotted the Alden family arriving at the festivity. Joachim, once again respected as a community leader, chatted animatedly with other fishermen. Constance, who had recently been appointed director of the local school, carried a tray of traditional fritters. And Victoria, now 8 years old, skipped along the sand, her curly hair dancing in the wind. Upon seeing the former judge, the girl flashed a wide smile and ran towards him. "Judge, you came." "Of course I came, Victoria. I promised, didn't I?" The child nodded, happy. Since the incident in court, a special bond had formed between the two. Anthony regularly visited the Alden family, bringing books for Victoria and talking at length with Joachim and Constance. It was as if, together, they were discovering a new way of understanding the world. "Can you run yet?" the girl asked, observing the cane with curiosity. "Not yet," he replied, laughing. "The doctors say I need patience. 15 years of inactivity aren't recovered overnight. But you will run one day, I know. If you say so, who am I to doubt?" he replied with a knowing smile. Joachim approached, extending his hand to the former magistrate. "It's an honor to have you here, Judge. Your presence means a lot to our community." "The honor is mine, Joachim. To see all that you have achieved in recent months, it's inspiring. Indeed, the story of the Shoreham by Sea fisherman's struggle and the miracle that changed Judge Nogueira's life had inspired communities across the country. Reports on the case stimulated discussions about sustainable development that respected local traditions. Similar cooperative projects began to emerge in other coastal regions, always with a focus on cultural and environmental preservation. "Come, Judge," Constance invited. "The table is set. We have much to celebrate today." As they walked to the area where the tables were laid out, Anthony spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Eliza, his ex-wife, accompanied by their son Lucas, now a young doctor at the beginning of his career. The reunion had happened a month after the incident in court. After seeing the news about her ex-husband's miraculous recovery, Eliza got in touch, initially skeptical, believing it to be some kind of hoax or media exaggeration. The meeting, tense at first, turned into a long and sincere conversation about the 15 years of separation, accumulated grievances, and recent transformations. "I'm not asking for us to get back together," Anthony had said on that occasion. "I know you've built your life away from me, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know that the bitter and resentful man no longer exists, and that I would like, if possible, to have you both back in my life in some way." Over time, a cautious friendship developed. Lucas, initially resistant due to painful childhood memories, gradually grew closer to his father, especially motivated by professional interest in the extraordinary medical case he represented. "Eliza, Lucas," Anthony called, waving for them to approach. "Come meet the true heroes of this story." Introductions were made, and soon everyone was sitting at the table, sharing the meal and stories. The atmosphere was one of genuine celebration, not just of the material achievements represented by the cooperative, but of something deeper, the rediscovery of faith in the impossible. After lunch, while the elders chatted in the shade of palm trees, Victoria took Lucas to show him the family fish market, now renovated and transformed into a tourist spot that preserved traditional techniques while implementing sustainable practices. "You know," Lucas commented, impressed by the wisdom of the little guide, "as a doctor, I have studied my father's case exhaustively. None of my professors can explain how someone with a complete spinal cord injury, stable for 15 years, could recover movement so significantly." Victoria shrugged, with the simplicity characteristic of childhood. "Sometimes you just need to believe." "Believe in what?" "In kindness, in truth, in love. In things you don't see but feel inside here," she replied, placing her hand over her heart. Lucas smiled, touched by the hidden depth in the seemingly simple answer. "You're a very special girl, you know. Everyone is special, Dr. Lucas. It's just that some people forget it along the way. In the afternoon, as the sun began its descent towards the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Anthony asked to speak. The party gradually quieted, everyone attentive to what the former judge had to say. A few months ago, I walked into that courtroom as a broken man, not just physically, but in my essence. Years of bitterness had convinced me that the world was a cold place, where justice was just a power game, where miracles did not exist. His voice, firm and clear, carried an authentic emotion that touched everyone present. A child changed all that. With her unwavering faith, her serene certainty, Victoria not only returned movement to my paralyzed legs, she returned light to my soul. She taught me that true strength is not in rigidity, but in flexibility. Not in distrust, but in faith. Not in isolation, but in community. Emotional glances turned to little Victoria, who listened attentively, unself-consciously accepting the recognition. Therefore, I want to announce today that I am using my retirement to create the New Paths Foundation, dedicated to two causes that have become essential to me: the defense of traditional communities against predatory interests and support for the rehabilitation of people with spinal cord injuries. The news was met with enthusiastic applause. Eliza and Lucas exchanged proud glances. That man, reborn through an inexplicable experience, had finally found a purpose greater than himself. And I want to invite all of you, Anthony continued, to participate in this new path, because I learned in the most extraordinary way possible that together we are capable of achieving the impossible. New applause echoed across the beach, mixing with the sound of the waves. Joachim embraced his wife and daughter, his face reflecting the gratitude of a man who had faced injustice and emerged not only free, but strengthened by the experience. At the end of the celebration, as the sun set on the horizon, creating a spectacle of colors in the Sussex sky, Anthony walked to the water's edge. He felt the warm water touch his feet, a sensation he had long believed lost forever. Victoria approached silently, stopping beside him to contemplate the infinite horizon. "Thank you," he said simply, without taking his eyes off the sunset. The girl smiled, her face illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. "I just showed you the way, Judge. You decided to walk." Anthony reflected on those simple yet profoundly wise words. Indeed, the true miracle had not just been the inexplicable physical recovery, but the spiritual transformation, the rediscovery of the ability to believe, to trust, to have faith. "You know, Victoria," he said, after a moment of contemplative silence, "I think you're right. In the end, we all have the power to perform miracles. We just need to believe enough." The girl nodded, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. For her, perhaps it was. As the first stars began to dot the sky, Anthony Nogueira felt a peace he had never experienced before. The man who for so long had defined himself by rigidity, skepticism and bitterness now embraced flexibility, faith, and gratitude. And it had all begun with an impossible promise, made by a child who refused to accept limits, both those imposed on a judge's legs and those imposed on her father's freedom. The Brighton courthouse miracle would continue to be studied, debated and questioned for years. Some would explain it through science not yet understood, others through faith in higher powers. But for those who directly lived the experience, the explanation mattered less than the lesson. When we truly believe, the limits of the possible expand, and life reveals its deepest nature, a constant invitation to walk beyond the boundaries we once believed insurmountable. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Victoria, Joachim, and Judge Anthony has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions and reflections, we have prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories. Find it here on the left side of the screen. If this narrative about faith, redemption, and second chances resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of the human experience. Share with us in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a miracle in your lives? We look forward to hearing your stories.